Hi, Hunter Hastings here. There are critics of capitalism. May seem strange to you and me, but it's a fact that we must recognize. Some of those critics are in the government, heading up departments like the DOJ and the FTC and many more. Some of them are in schools teaching our kids. Some of them are in academia, and they're undermining our culture. Fortunately, not everyone in academia suffers from what Elon calls the woke mindset. Today's guest is Kimberlee Josephson, and she most certainly does not suffer in that way. Kimberlee is professor of business at Lebanon Valley College. She's a research fellow with the Consumer Choice Center. Her doctorate is in global studies, and she also has degrees in business administration, political science, commerce, and international policy. So we can be confident that she thinks about how all these threads pull together. She writes, wonderfully I might add, at AIER.
This is the Value Creators Podcast. Value creation is the sole purpose of any business and every business, and for all of us as entrepreneurs. Listen to great value creators as they share their successes, trials, and lessons learned. Join us as we explore how to think as value creators, how to act as value creators, and how to view business through the lens of value creation.
Kimberlee, welcome to the Value Creators Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's great to have you on our little discussion here. You and I are both fans of capitalism. We're proponents of business as the great driver of well-being and of wealth creation. You teach business at Lebanon College, and we'll have you tell us about that. You conduct a lot of research into topics about choice and the application of what we like to call consumer sovereignty at the Consumer Choice Center. And I've read some things that suggest that you are bold enough to question a lot of the conventional business education these days. So we're going to talk about business education, but tell us about your background and your teaching platform a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So I am an associate professor of business at Lebanon Valley College. So that is near Hershey, Pennsylvania. So one of the sweetest places on earth. I teach a diversity of courses ranging from first years all the way up to the graduate level. But, my passion is really focusing on theory and marketing and management, as well as global studies. And I really, much of my research looks into the stakeholder mindset and CSR. And kind of, I'm a bit of a skeptic about it as well. So how you mentioned, I do research for the Consumer Choice Center. I always think it's of interest for consumers to have autonomy and sovereignty and lots of options, and also to try to have a consumer surplus where they feel that they are profiting from the exchange, right? So it's perfect that you're, what you promote is value creators, right? Because a business can only, the whole purpose is to create value for consumers, and consumers want to seek out that surplus where they feel it's a worthwhile transaction. So yeah, but my courses, once again, range from everything from marketing to international business to organizational communications, and I love it. So I have a very interdisciplinary background. I have my undergrad is in business and political science. I have 2 masters, one in international policy studies, another in international relations, and my PhD is in international commerce. So a little bit of everything.
Well, very broad and very deep. So let's start at the big picture of capitalism, Kimberlee. And one of the things we notice is that a lot of people calling for rethinking capitalism, reimagining capitalism, reinventing capitalism, I've even seen. A lot of it is about greater social responsibility, and some people identify profit as the villain here. We should be worrying about other things. So how do you see the critics of capitalism and where they go wrong?
Sure. Yeah. And like I said, a big interest of mine is studying the growth and evolution of CSR, which stands for corporate social responsibility, and this adoption of the stakeholder mindset. And actually, I think maybe what is helpful, and I think what my students tend to enjoy, is I tend to be very candid in the classroom and talking about my own experiences. So despite, having multiple degrees, my work in academia has been somewhat sporadic and kind of a snowball effect. I never planned to become a professor. So I do have work in web marketing. I do have work. I worked actually for Harry Winston when I first started out. So in Manhattan, doing sales at their headquartered salon right on Fifth Avenue. So I think some of my corporate experience helps me bring kind of a real world lens into the classroom in terms of application. And something that I have seen with CSR is just how sometimes it does more harm than good. Sometimes it actually distracts from the true purpose of a firm and its core competencies. Even some of the case studies that are featured in textbooks have come to over time prove that they were not as effective as they might have been championed for at the beginning. So when I started teaching in the early 2000s, this is really when CSR started to make a name for itself and be widely adopted. And I always had kind of it. I just had an uneasiness about it, whereas I think everyone just embraced it. Business for good and doing good is good business, and it all sounds great, but I think. Yeah, and actually, I think the reason why I was a little skeptical too is because some of my graduate work focused on economic development, and so I'm always a little wary of anything that relates to dependency-based relationships, or studies on foreign aid have shown that it's been counterproductive, and also I'm a little bit wary of any forms of rent seeking that might arise in such transactions and relationships. So, kind of focusing on the social performance or social good that a business provides, I felt was delving a little bit into that realm. And so, that's what really sparked my interest. But that being said, you might have seen in my article at the American Institute for Economic Research, I criticized business studies and how really in the early 2000s, once again, CSR was widely embraced. And it was almost like the way for academia could prove to, and I say it in the article, prove to everyone else that we're not creating more Gordon geckos, right? We're creating good people, right? And business is good for society. And, I feel like the focus on, external matters that are social matters and largely subjective can create a very slippery slope. So that's kind of my fascination. But this runs very deep though too, and I think it's not overly surprising. Like, this was brought up in Howard Bowen's 1953 publication of The Social Responsibility of a Businessman. Theodore Levitt actually focused on this too in the 1950s. And then Milton Friedman, obviously, everybody knows his famous saying of the business, the core business of a business is to be in business. So this has been something that's been discussed and debated for a long time, but now we really do see its application coming to fruition, and how CSR has evolved into other areas such as ESG and things like that.
So what was the problem that these folks were trying to solve, Kimberlee? So you've cited some of the sources there. We could also point to Peter Drucker, who said that the purpose of business is to create and keep a customer, which is not a social responsibility, it's a business responsibility. And Milton Friedman, who said social responsibility is tied up in maximizing profits. So that does good for society. So what were the critics or the reformers trying to solve? What was the problem?
Well, and I think, once again, thinking about what is the role of business in society, because it is multifaceted in that we know that there can be negative externalities that occur. And so it was almost kind of like, how do we counteract these and maybe create positive externalities that go beyond the transaction, right? So just go beyond the buyer producer relationship and have a spillover effect. Someone that I like to cite a lot, and I really admire his work, is Archie Carroll, who came up with the CSR pyramid in the 1990s. So the CSR pyramid, it just gradually goes from level to level about the responsibility of a business, right? And so at the base level, you have the economic responsibility. The next level is the legal responsibility. The next level is ethical responsibility. And these all make sense, right? If you're going to be in business, you have to make money, right? You have to abide by the rules of the game, the law. You have to act ethically, if you want to have a good, positive reputation. And sometimes ethics, go beyond expectations of the law. So these all make sense. And he depicted these as all being required. Right at the very tip of the pyramid was our philanthropic responsibility. But this wasn't, he didn't have it depicted as required, but rather as desired. In that, as an organization, if it makes sense for you to give back, there's nothing wrong with that if you do it in accordance to your core competencies, and if it has a positive impact. Actually, Milton Friedman even was not opposed to doing philanthropic work if it was leveraged as window dressing, I believe he said. So he viewed it as, hey, this is good marketing, this is good advertising, right? The problem is, what I see today is that pyramid has now been flipped on its head. And the focus is more on this social impact first, right? And so, programs at universities that really highlight social entrepreneurship and really having that external focus and having a social impact, this is really taking the viewpoint of what a business is supposed to be doing. So that economic responsibility, right? And the profit motive of, why you go into business and being productive for productive sake and creating value for the market versus I want to focus on virtue, or I want to focus on this social cause or this social matter. And that's going to be my purpose of the organization. And hopefully I make money doing that so it can be sustained.
Yeah, that's a great analysis. Flipping the pyramid, I can visualize that. We'll dig out an image of that pyramid and we'll let people think about flipping it. So then what happened after CSR and those kinds of things is we got some highly, highly specific programs like DEI and ESG, which I think you can make a case can be very detrimental to businesses. If nothing else, they build up a huge internal bureaucracy, which becomes a different power structure than the one that's serving customers. So just dig into those programs. How do you teach your students about those?
Yeah, well, and once again, I think it's really helpful for students to understand the trajectory of how this came about too. So the roots run deep, even in regards to ESG and in relation to CSR. We did see the debate about what is the role of business in society in the 1950s and 1960s. In the 1980s is when the stakeholder theory actually came about, and that was Edward Freeman who came up with that and coined that term. We also have in the 1990s, then you have the creation of the conscious capitalism movement. And you had all of these kind of social movement organizations and cause-related campaigns come about in the 1990s. The World Business Academy was formed. And so you had this real focus on a higher calling for business, the triple bottom line, if you've heard of people, planet, or profit. So that was John Elkington. He came up with that. So you had this whole kind of accumulation of business wanting to do more and having this higher calling at the same time where you had these international institutions that were really focusing on development initiatives, right? And so if you remember, the Millennium Development Goals that the UN put forth, right? So that was in the 2000s. That since has morphed into the Sustainable Development Goals, right? But if we're going to be pursuing these goals, these international institutions actually needed capital behind it. They needed the business community to be behind it. And so in the early 2000s, I believe it was 2006, they released the Business for Good report. So the idea of who cares who wins, I think it was 2004, the Who Cares Who Wins report, which really kind of put the emphasis on business's role in helping to foster development, especially in relation to these UN goals for ending poverty, clean water, all that. So, so in 2006, the PRI was launched, which is known as the Principles for Responsible Investment. And that has since then culminated in that, we've had businesses sign on to the PRI, but you can't manage what you can't measure, right? And so they came up with ways to establish metrics to show that we are actually making progress towards these Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and making progress towards what was put forth in these reports. And that is how you came out with ESG, right? So environmental, social, and governance. So, it kind of, once again, it's this thing that's just been a snowball effect that's evolved. And same thing, when we think about environmental, social, and governance, how do you how do you really measure that? How do you really track that? And what's really interesting too is even that is very kind of hodgepodge in terms of there are different
Right.
standards, there are different metrics. It's a very new realm of study too. So all these chief sustainability officers and stuff, it's such a huge, broad, like what does sustainability entail, right? It's just such a huge realm to be focused on and try to implement. And so I think people within these fields are just trying to do as best they can. But once again, like they want metrics, they want a way to manage it, they want a way to monitor it, and so this is how ESG came about. Predominantly, environmental matters was given the big focus, right? In 2020, we saw a dramatic shift in emphasis though on social. And that's why also you have diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's also now DEIB with belonging. So the acronyms always evolve and change. But this was the kind of awareness that, hey, we also need to focus on the social element and how do we go about doing that. And so once again, new metrics. Now, how I said it's hodgepodge. I'm actually a fan of it being messy. I'm a fan of a diversity in standards. I'm a little nervous when you have the consolidation and standardization of all these different systems. And actually, it's already been happening. So I don't know if you're aware of ISO standards. So the international organization, yes. So the International Organization for Standardization, they have some that I think make a lot of sense. So ISO 9000 focuses on quality management, right, and ensuring the safety of a product, and it helps ease transactions. If you have international trade and it's ISO certified, you can feel confident. They actually came up with a certification for social responsibility. And most recently, they have a certification for verifying ethical claims. So you see this consolidation and the standardization, and that's worrisome to me because every business, every industry is different and distinct. And if they're abiding by these forms of assessment, it kind of traps them in almost like a soft form of regulatory power. And that soft form could also lead to the creation of a more formal one where it becomes, initiated industry-wide.
Yeah, that's the whole rabbit hole of everything becomes numbers and measurement as opposed to human values, which is where we started, but we seem to be wandering away from it. You, in fact, at the firm level, Kimberlee, you've said that the problem is companies are trying to become moral arbiters. So that was in a piece where you said that the purpose-oriented strategy is leading us away from a profit-oriented strategy, and that's not a good thing at the firm level. So we're wandering into morality here. What were you thinking when you wrote that?
Yeah. Well, I don't. So going back to that original, CSR pyramid, I don't think it is wrong if an organization is able to give back, and especially if it's within their wheelhouse and their area of competency. So, for example, my husband, he's an arborist, so he does tree work, right? If he wants to donate a tree to our municipality, more power to him, right? He should not be dabbling though in things that are outside of that area of expertise. Also, when you have larger organizations, so ones that, they do have investors and shareholders, if they are taking that money and putting it towards cause-related campaigns or things of that sort, they are really shifting gears and focus for the organization. And when it's done on such a large scale, that's worrisome to me because some companies are more powerful and more influential than, even some governments. And I think it would be better to decentralize and localize those forms of giving, right? Pay your employees and your investors, give them that money and they can pursue charitable organizations or philanthropic activities that they want to do at the localized and decentralized level rather than at the top. And then also you have the competition between firms based off of that virtue and value. It almost it almost puts those firms that are not giving to some sort of social cause in a negative light, whereas really they're just doing business, and that's really what they should be focusing on. And it almost becomes a race to the bottom in terms of who's helping victims more, or who's helping these global problems more, things like so it creates kind of a a strange relationship between the transaction of a buyer and a seller, and now you're really basing your purchase off of
Yeah.
the moral initiatives of the firm.
I've still got this image in my head of the flipped over pyramid here. It's broken and it's falling apart and things are leaking out of it. So let me just take the other side for a second. There is research, also academic, I think, that the maximizing shareholder value, shareholder value, MSV movement, can be detrimental too. So if shareholder value is the primary goal, a lot of it is expressed in narrow stock trading, in dividends, and in stock buybacks, which is a pretty detrimental development recently, I think, which takes the value creating for customers and kind of focuses it on a very narrow group, the shareholders. Is that a legitimate element of criticism against business, that MSV is taking away from customer value?
I don't have a problem with MSV.
Yep.
Yeah, I really don't. I think, you think in terms, so I always go down to first principles, right? So I think in terms of whose property is it? Whose money is it, right? And if people are happy, if consumers are purchasing the product, no one's forcing a consumer to buy a product, right? So if they are buying the product and they're happy with it, and also too, the shareholders do keep upper levels of management in check, so they do keep the C-suite in check to some extent. So for example, and this is what worries me with pursuing social matters or even ESG, is that a company can make a case for putting their resources or efforts or money towards these kind of pet projects, and make a case, even if it is not even if it's not beneficial to the company. They can make a claim that, well, this is going to help us with our rating system. So I really like to focus on just what's the core purpose of the firm, who is involved, and also too, letting the market play out. If it turns out that a company is kind of abusing the use of its resources, or it's not properly allocating what it is doing within the organization, it will come back to haunt them. But in terms of how much money shareholders are making, or how much money CEOs are making, I don't care that Oprah has multiple vacation homes. So as long as we see and this does go back to a concern over ethics. So we do want organizations to act ethically and be responsible in regards to economics, law, and their how they conduct themselves. But in regards to how much they want to pay a CEO, or how much shareholders get from their investment, I don't have an issue with that. I think that's up to the organization, and also the market will vote with its dollars too. And over time, that organization probably won't last if it's not allocating its funds and resources properly.
Good. Well, that's very clear. So there's another axis here, Kimberlee, which you've also written about, and that's government. And we wonder sometimes whether some of these criticisms and restrictions on business come from government or academia or the business world. But one of the elements you've written about is antitrust. And the current head of the FTC, Lena Khan, made her reputation with a memo that she wrote, or a paper that she wrote at Yale, that was against Amazon. And as I said, if you're against Amazon, you're against customers having any value whatsoever. So what's the role of government here? Are they driving some of this criticism of business? And specifically, why do they hate scale? Why do they hate companies being successful?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's just so maddening, especially as a business professor, because a lot of what I teach in the classroom is trying to figure out different competitive strategies to employ, to really set yourself apart, to differentiate, to get as much market share as you can. I actually have an article in Discourse magazine called "Antitrust is Anti-Business," and I go through some strategies that we teach in the classroom that if you get too big, you're probably going to get flagged by being called a
Right.
monopoly or having a tying agreement, right? So like a blue ocean strategy is a business strategy where you try to create a pool of profits that are all your own. So you have your own market base that's so distinct and separate, right? You're really, you're the only one there. And yet, that's something that, Lena Khan has made clear, that too much market share is a problem. And I try to convey to students, like, is it a problem that Legos is Legos, right? Is it a problem that you have Crayola who dominates crayons? Is it a problem that you have Tostitos is the number one when it comes to tortilla chips, right? There's so many different things out there. If the market is being satisfied and you have dominant industry leaders, they got there because they were doing something right. They were the most profitable. They were the most attractive. They were able to scale, and that actually improves efficiencies within a market economy. Also, they are more likely to have difficulty innovating later on. The larger the scale, the more entrenched you become in your position. So these organizations do seek to acquire or fund startups, and that can be a really good thing for the economy as well. So as long as there are no entry barriers, there's no issue if you only have one provider. Actually, there could be inefficiencies. I think Milton Friedman is the one who said it doesn't make sense to have multiple telephone pole producers for your town, right? You only need one that does it really well and really right. And if they don't, then that provides an opportunity for an entrepreneur to enter in, right? And so even, Lena Khan has made it very clear that she is not a fan of mergers and acquisitions. And so I do have a piece at AIER on the Kroger-Albertsons merger and how that's being blocked. And really, to me, I'd like to have a separation of politics and economics. I feel like it's none of the government's business because there's no way to know if a merger or an acquisition is actually going to be successful. Actually, most acquisitions have a very high failure rate. So there is a lot of risk involved. So for the government to think that it can pick and choose winners and losers and also prevent organizations who want to scale or who want to engage in a transaction. I would think a lot of startups would love to see a larger organization take their idea to greater heights, right? That's something that is of interest to a lot of people, and also we should be really admiring these big firms. Most of them don't last forever, so when they do, it's quite impressive. I remember, and this is the thing, you just have to take into some historical context. I bring up in class about how, Netflix used to be featured in the news a lot, that this is a monopoly and Netflix has to be broken up. I think this was around 2016, right? Not even that long ago. And it was a big concern. We need to, fix this monopoly. Well, now you have Hulu, you have Disney Plus, you have Apple, right? You have all these, you have Prime, you have all the Paramount Plus, like so many now that it's like, there's too many. Let's get back to one. I wish we just had one streaming service, right? So this concern over monopoly power, the concern over mergers and acquisitions, you never know. The classic merger that was a big fail, the mega fail of AOL and Time Warner, right? You never know if they're going to work out. So for the government to say that it can choose or predict the future and insert itself, and also it's really distracting these organizations from putting their resources and time and effort towards innovations. And it's actually costing our tax dollars for all these court cases. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, Peter Thiel, I think, in his book 0 to 1, said every business should be a monopoly. That's the goal. We want to be differentiated to the point that we're the customer's choice. Yeah.
Precisely.
But
Yeah.
one of the hints you dropped in that article, Kimberlee, is that perhaps the government has even darker motives in antitrust than just the technical question of monopoly, that they're trying to suppress and restrict and limit freedoms in various ways. Go there for me.
Yeah. Well, I do try to I like to push buttons, but I also like to take a more nuanced approach too. So I think, man, you just think about the value that businesses create in the U.S. economy and about how important it is to, just our overall well-being. And I feel like the government is just wanting to have a say in it, almost like the philosopher kings type of approach, where, it really is within our economy. trying to maintain control and trying to have a say and creating somewhat of a nanny state. And that's actually something at the Consumer Choice Centers. We really try to flag that, you should not have this one size fits all. You shouldn't have blanket bans. You shouldn't have this nanny state approach, and we should allow for trial and error. Especially, if we want to have an economy that progresses, you need to allow for experimentation and for mistakes to be made. So funny. I actually like to watch that show. If you've ever seen it, it's called Is It Cake? It's a show that my kids love. It's on Netflix. And the amount of waste on that show of just making these cakes and making fake things that look like, that are made out of cakes, but it's so wasteful, but I love it and it brings joy. But I keep thinking, if someone were to want to clamp down on shows like this or things, saying this is unsustainable or this is food waste, or even at the end, you never have the winners say, you know what, I'm going to redistribute my winnings to all the other contestants. Like no one does that. Right. And so yet here we have the government that really is trying to, restrict our options. And it almost, I feel like is trying to dumb us down a little bit, like as if we need that type of hand-holding and oversight. But same thing with ESG. My biggest concern is that I think we have those that are in top positions who are really looking to have greater control and greater say, because really, when we think about business, that's what rules the world, right? In terms of power, in terms of trade and transactions and making things better. It's not the government. It's entrepreneurship, right? That really has made our lives better. And and I think, with ESG, it's trying to figure out how can we have a say in this? How can we have a stake in this? In what's going on. The problem, though, is once again, it's top down. And a lot of businesses are adopting ESG metrics, not because they necessarily want to, they just think that this is expected. And some of it too is also not off-putting at all. So for example, if we were to think about the different categories so if we went into social, right, you might say a social rating would measure how much maternity or paternity time your organization gives, right? No one's going to say that's bad. No one's going to say, oh, like everyone would agree, oh, that's nice to give maternity and paternity time, right? But that being said, there's some businesses that maybe they have to just stick with what is required by law. They don't have the opportunity or the bandwidth to grant a lot of time off for that. And so, they institute these practices because they're feeling the pressure to, but it might not always make sense for their situation. So it's creating these kind of, and you have some history working in academia, right? If we think about accreditation systems, right, and assessment measures, how crippling that is to creativity in terms of curriculum and in the classroom. And this is why we see universities haven't evolved forever, right? We're kind of still stuck in the same approach and same system. And it's because of, I think, and I hope I'm not going to get myself in trouble, but because of accreditation and assessment measures, you have to follow these benchmarks and expectations. And so
rules.
You're stuck. Yes, exactly.
So the answer you've told us is more competition. And that's another word that the critics of capitalism have distorted a little bit. They, competition is cold and nasty, and businesses go bankrupt because they can't compete, and jobs are lost, and so on like that. It's become a negative, as opposed to the entrepreneurial driver of the economy, as Mises put it. How did we let that happen? How do we let competition become a negative?
Oh, I don't know. Well, I do know. I do know. If you think about it, and I've heard others say this too, but it's true. And even going back to, even going back to the government, politics is downstream from culture. A lot of people will say that, right? We see it in our culture. We see it in movies that the bad guy is always a business person, right? Except for maybe Batman. Like Batman is kind of like, odd one. But any type of movie that you see, usually it is whoever has made millions or billions, or whoever is a business owner. They're always a criminal. I don't understand why. And like if you think about, you're watching a sporting event, you want them to crush the team. You want them to really advance, right? And you cheer, and you admire that talent. And within business, it's good to really want to earn that top spot. It really is good to really, really push yourself to the limits, take those risks, try your best. And also too, I know you have brought up, creative destruction as being somewhat a term that has almost a negative connotation to it. But so maybe an example of how I convey this in the classroom is, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Other People's
Yeah.
Money. It's an older movie, but there's a scene in it between Danny DeVito, who's Larry the Liquidator, and the owner of this firm, and they both have this debate as to whether or not the organization should live on, right? And so Danny DeVito's from Wall Street, and the CEO is making this kind of it's even got those like emotional tugs of why the organization should last. And so I don't have students watch the whole video, but we just watch those debates, and then we debate it a little bit. Should the organization, right? And then I bring it into kind of a good understanding in terms of, okay, now let's say that this company is Blockbuster, right? Do you let Blockbuster live on, or do you let it die? No one wants it anymore. Nobody wants a video rental store. They all want streaming. So even though Blockbuster, it's sad to see the stores close, or actually I think there's like one still around, a claim to fame. But even though, it hurts to think, oh, these people are losing their jobs, and, oh, the stores won't be around, and, oh, this famous brand is no longer relevant. You know what? That's life too, right? And we are better off for having better services and better products, thanks to creative destruction. And so if you don't have that competition, and you don't have that energy to want to get ahead, we're really going to see a more stagnant economy. And if we're looking to really always safeguard and protect jobs, and actually, usually when you have these resource constraints, or really when you are put on pressure, that's when we tend to be the most creative, right? Even in my own, I tell students about things that, when I'm trying to save money, I tend to be the most resourceful with things that I purchase. And I put value on functionality and on those primary attributes. And so sometimes when a business is facing competition, it actually forces them to really do a deep dive into how they can be more efficient, how they can create more value, and not have what's known as competitive inertia. A lot of times you have organizations that are successful will stop being competitive because they'll just be kind of resting on that success. So it's good to have competition to push.
The problem in my mind with the term creative destruction is people remember the destruction part, not the creative part. And if you'd called it creative advancement or creative progress, then we'd be better off, which brings me to the communications point, Kimberlee, is that you and I and everybody in our profession sees business as a very dynamic system. It's constantly changing, constantly improving. It's moving in a good direction all the time. I don't know whether you know the book by Hans Rosling called Factfulness, and he has 16 bad things that are getting better and 16 good things that are even getting better and better every day. Things like literacy around the world, and child mortality, and women in the workforce, and solving diseases and things like that. Everything's moving in the right direction in a dynamic sense, but somehow we focus on the destruction part. That's the problem to get across, I think.
Yeah. Well, and also too, it's with my students, I really do try to bring it down to a level of, once again, those first principles of just, what does profit mean, right? It means that you're actually doing something right. Clearly, there is value being created in the market. It's a signal, right? Because also we know if we're not profiting, we know we're not being either efficient within the organization and the utilization of our resources, or what we're offering to the marketplace is not of value and not worth purchasing, right? So it serves as a signal that then you can use that to inform strategies, reinvest, figure out what to, so that's something that should be viewed as this is a very positive thing, not a negative thing. And even in regards to scaling and big business, a lot of my students who want to start a business, if they were to hit it big, should they therefore all of a sudden be demonized for that? If they come up with a great idea and let's say they develop a business that becomes a chain organization or a franchise model that takes off and they end up making a lot of money on it, does that automatically now position them as being someone who's bad, right? And why is that? Why do we have such a negative view of that growth, right? So just because you find success doesn't automatically turn you into someone that should be demonized.
Right, exactly. We're delighted to announce the Value Creators online course. For entrepreneurs in every kind of business, big, small, or medium, at every stage, in every industry, our course provides the foundations and principles on which to build success. Simple, clear purpose and principles give rise to creativity, innovation, and competitively superior business action. There are 11 foundational principles or mental models that together cohere into the value business model. Principles for value generation, principles for value operations, principles for value finance and accounting, and principles for value sustainability, as well as the new knowledge accumulation you'll need for continuous innovation. These principles are delivered by top business professors from top business schools: Mark Packard, Per Byland, Gordon Miller, David Rapp, and Bart Vanderhagen. You'll find video lessons from them, along with downloadable tools, processes, and other valuable content. Master these lessons, and you'll master the most important skill in business: value creation. Go to thevaluecreators.com and click the course link. So let's just touch on business education, Kimberlee. You've been doing that for a long time. We teach these values, hopefully, that we're talking about customer sovereignty and value creation. But historically, it's captured in the word, I think, MBA, business administration. We're teaching mechanics and methods and math and spreadsheets and P&Ls and so on, which are important, but we're not teaching the dynamic creative values. So how do you approach it? How do you try to get that positive, dynamic, value-based attitude into your students?
Yeah, well, one thing that I do like to teach in the classroom is how to be an intrapreneur, right? So within an organization. So entrepreneur is someone who can monetize and capitalize on an opportunity, right? And bring it to the marketplace. Whereas within organizations, I think it's, and we've seen different models and structures be tried over time. So for example, flattened management was something that was tried by a few companies in the early 2000s, which we've seen doesn't really work as well. It is important to have that hierarchy, have a structure. So if you Max Weber's bureaucratic management, the rule from the desk. So there is a benefit to knowing that chain of command and who reports to who and what resources are allocated to what, and having forms of departmentalization. But that being said, too, you can have a very rigid system where if the structure does not allow for engagement or collaboration, you're going to have an organization that's not very creative or innovative, right? So I like to focus on entrepreneurship and how within organizations you can decentralize that process. So still keep the structure, but allow for cross-functional teaming. So having this polycentric approach of many centers of power. And then also within your role as a manager or an employee, even before you get to that management position, thinking in regards to how you can improve the value that is created by the organization, right? How you can So just same thing of having an entrepreneurial mindset, being a risk taker, wanting to advance. Same thing within an organization. So for the organization, how can you create that value that then will have a ripple effect and right and be a benefit to both the organization and then the population that it serves as well. But yeah, I do teach courses on management theory, and I tell students we learn this because we're still learning, right? There has not been one perfect system for any one perfect organization. And really it does come down to the individuals within the organization, the culture that's established. There are so many studies in terms of this is the type of leadership style, or this is the type of structure you should have in a firm. And it's, well, firms still have problems, right? And even right now, we know that firms are grappling with the virtual environment and requiring people to come back in the office. And how do we manage that? So, people are complex. And so businesses are very complex because they're made up of people. And so we just learn different strategies, but there's no right one. There's not a perfect fix to any of it.
Yeah, I'm delighted to hear you use the term entrepreneurship in such a broad way. I think that's another word that's been distorted. We think of it as startups and small business, but actually it's the core of value creation. If we could think about how to embed entrepreneurship in every firm, every size, every industry, every scale. And to your point also, I think of entrepreneurship as the opposite of bureaucracy. That is eliminating bureaucracy. And there are some ways to do that. There are some models that eliminate bureaucracy. So I'm delighted to hear you talk about entrepreneurship like that. Do your students understand that? Understand entrepreneurship as a, all across business kind of approach?
Yeah, well, and it's so funny because I think it sounds like a very complex term.
Yeah.
But really, there are so many different forms that students can see. And I have some students in my class who are, they're solopreneurs, they're micropreneurs. So they're pursuing their own little startups in terms of what it is that they're doing. And essentially, right, an entrepreneur is someone who just seizes an opportunity, right? So they are very in tune with these different trends or things that can be leveraged. They don't have to necessarily be an innovator or an inventor. They have to be someone who knows how to take something and market it and monetize it. And so, a lot of students, they even see it in their own lives. So I think it's very good for them to also understand the personal responsibility involved with entrepreneurship, right? There is a lot of risk taking. There are a lot of growing pains for entrepreneurs. And I think it's beneficial for them to have that mindset of, how can I be a creator of value? And I don't necessarily have to open up a formal business. I can just get started doing a side hustle of who knows what, right? So you have the gig economy now. So these are, I would say, people who are taking advantage of opportunities and trying to leverage and capitalize on them.
I like your characterization of it as a mindset as opposed to a method or a set of steps or that kind of thing. You talked about academia being somewhat non-dynamic. It hasn't changed much. One of the places where people can get business education now is online through Udemy and Coursera or YouTube, or a lot of universities put courses on Canvas. What do you think about that as a way to get business education? And do you encourage it, or do you teach them to stay in the classroom?
Yeah. No, I love it. And my students will laugh because also I do love using segments of podcasts and things like that. So there are so many great resources, especially for my marketing students. I'm always pushing them to different, there's so many great resources out there right now that are free. And there's actually a podcast that I listen to. It's called the Marketing Book podcast. And the host always features, going over a book. And so it's great because then you can know, am I going to purchase this book? Is it worthwhile? And he's just great. And at the end, he always ends it with this tagline, and I love it. And it's a quote by Jim Rohn saying, "Formal education will make you a living. Self-education will make you a fortune." And I just think it's so perfect because a lot of what we teach in the classroom, I try to teach students not what to think, but really how to think, and just kind of give them the tools of how you approach problems, how you can integrate, how you can really challenge yourself, because if we focus too much on the hard skills, the technical skills, they're going to be obsolete by the time that they graduate, right? So we really have to focus on those critical thinking skills, on creativity, and then also about really challenging the status quo. So I like to give examples of how my favorite case study is how Dyson, all the market data told the founder of Dyson, James Dyson, that no one wanted to see the dirt. Everybody preferred the bagged vacuums, right? That was standard. Everybody wanted it. The market research said they still wanted it. And he said, I don't care. I want them to see this suction power. And that power, actually, he discovered when visiting a sawmill, I think it was, right? And now he went from something that creates this cylinder-based vacuum that now all vacuums are cylinder-based, right? Even though the market data said we don't want it, right? Turns out we want it. So now all vacuums have this. And then he went from being a business to consumer good in terms of household use to then B2B with the reversing of the technology for hand dryers, right? And so now he's focusing on a different segment with a different product, but with the same technology. And then now he's got super expensive hair dryers. So back to the consumer market, right? So how you learn to pivot. In one of my articles, I mentioned how Play-Doh didn't start off as for toys or for children. It was actually used to get coal residue off the walls, right? Nintendo started off as a playing card company, right? There's just so many areas where these businesses had to pivot either because they needed to, because of creative destruction, or because they wanted to, because they just had an interest in going in another direction. And same thing with the market. We don't always know what we want until we have it. Right. And so also showing and creating that perception of value that will engage consumers and who will want to try and want to buy. And, now that we have it, there are certain things where it's like, oh, I think I can live without this. Right. And my students think I'm crazy when I say in college, I didn't have a cell phone. Right. It was only one of those flip phones. And I had it, I think, in my senior year and stuff. And you had to pay per text. And now it's, oh, my goodness, what a change. Right. And what a huge improvement too. So the more you expose yourself to these different, skill sets, but also even industry leaders or different talks and different books, and how do you integrate that knowledge? I think that's super important. So as an individual, even in regards to what they do in academia, I think it's silly. So because I say, I don't want to put these stipulations or assessments on anyone, but I always tell my students, I think all business majors should have to take a theater class, right? Because you have to be able to think on your feet. You have to perform. You have to get up in front of people. And that's a transferable skill, being able to get up and talk in front of others, being able to think, being able to also collaborate with others who you're sharing the stage with. So there are all these transferable skills of things that you can gain insight and education from. So I understand that there's kind of that paper ceiling now where you need the degree to get the job, but they should not rely on it. If they only rely on the degree, they're not going to get very far.
Well, Kimberlee, I can tell it's fun and exciting and very educational and mind expanding to be in your classroom. So that must be a thrill for people.
Thank you.
Let's wrap it up there just for time. But thank you for today. And when you come back, we'll talk about entrepreneurship and mindset and those kinds of things, and whether you can actually teach those or whether there's something that individuals have to absorb, as you say. But we'll call it a day for now. You're off in some foreign teaching, is that right?
Yes. So our institution does short-term study abroad trips. We have full study abroad semesters and everything, but we will host some short-term study abroad where faculty members will travel with students. So I'm actually going to Maastricht University, and I'll be going with some of my students from LVC over there, and very excited. So we're leaving on Friday. So everything, and I've got kids and my husband are coming. So, scrambling to get everything all packed and ready, but very, very excited. I studied abroad when I was younger, and my graduate work is also overseas. And so I'm a huge advocate. So I'm thrilled to be able to go with students now on this little educational adventure.
Good. Well, safe travels. Thank you so much for today. You've added such a lot to the way that we think about business education. So thank you very much.
This has been another episode of the Value Creators Podcast. Thanks for listening. You can visit thevaluecreators.com for links and resources related to this episode, and check out hunterhastings.com for more content on entrepreneurial business management based on value creation principles.